Good evening, good evening. And I know you can hear me because the chat function is working. Now, I've got two devices going so that I can admit people if they arrive a little bit late. And if we've got neurodivergent children in our lives, if we've been parents, our parents, then we know how busy it can be. So please don't worry if you need to keep your camera off, if you need to disappear at some point. And I'm going to make this really, really quick. Now I will just start, I'll shift over to my main screen so that you can see that. And then we will make a start. Got more people arriving, so I'm just going to let them in, make sure that as many people as possible are in so that I don't need to break my flow too much once we have started. It's great to see so many here. I'm just going to let these people in. Hello, Eleanor. Hello, Emma. Welcome, welcome, everybody. Welcome, Emma. I'm just going to make sure that there's nobody else waiting. And then I really will make a start. Now, if at any point you can't see, oh, wrong way, just shared my screen incorrectly. If at any point you can't see my screen or me, or you can't hear me, then do just unmute yourself or say something in the chat and I will make sure that I fix whatever may or may not be going on. I'm just going to make sure we're at 6:34 here in the UK. Really lovely to see some people from South Africa here. You are very, very welcome. And as soon as it hits 6:35, I'm going to make that my hard line and make a start. Because I know how precious time is for everybody. Okay, let's go. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Navigating Neurodivergence, the 3 big breakthroughs. Now, I'm going to keep this short because I do know how precious time is. But this particular training, I'm doing a condensed version this evening. I normally do this training in just under an hour. I'm going to try and get through this in 30 minutes because I know that time is short. But these are the 3 big breakthroughs that I made as a mum to neurodivergent children, but putting into practice my professional experience as a specialist teacher too. So just so that you know who you're talking to, very briefly, I am Charlotte McDougall, founder of Nurture and Thrive. I've worked in education for over 15 years and had various roles from class teacher to senior leadership positions. And in that time, I secured my master's degree in education. I also got my qualification to diagnose dyslexia and to become a certified ADHD coach. I have had my work published in national publications like the Times Education Supplement, and you can see my book there, the second edition of which was published very recently, Reclaiming the Narrative and Thriving with SEND. And as I've mentioned, I also have lived experience of having neurodivergent children, a neurodivergent husband, and I am neurodivergent myself. So I am coming at this very much from both a personal and a professional perspective. So the 3 big breakthroughs that I'm going to talk through this evening are here. Number 1 is about real confidence. I'm just going to make sure that I know there are some people trying to get in, so I'm just going to see if I can let them in. There we go. That's Caroline. Lovely. Welcome, Caroline. I was just explaining that the 3 big breakthroughs that we're going to look at is this idea of supporting a confident neurodivergent identity. So many of the parents who talk to me tell me that their children are struggling with confidence. They are full of negative self-talk. Their self-esteem is low, and that has a knock-on effect on friendships and on their ability just to live and learn with more ease. Confidence is the foundation of everything. The second big breakthrough that I'm going to explore this evening is about reducing executive function friction. So all of those day-to-day activities that the prefrontal cortex part of our brain manages, this management system, organizing, planning, sequencing, being able to initiate tasks, all these executive function skills are more challenging for the neurodivergent brain, and it just feels like the whole day is full of friction. So we need to look at ways of accessing those executive function skills more successfully. And then the third big breakthrough is around emotional regulation, probably the most visible of the challenges that parents of neurodivergent children face, because this tends to show itself most clearly in meltdowns. So if we can understand what causes this dysregulation and the role of the nervous system there, then we can have a better handle on that. So our very first breakthrough. Now, I'm sure that I'm preaching to the converted here, but I do just want to mention the labelling issue, just in case any of you or perhaps family members have reservations about labelling your child. So I just want to tell you 3 very quick reasons why I think it's incredibly important. Because first of all, it's not going to change the reality of your child's neurotype if we hide from this label, if we hide from the reality of their neurodivergence, whether that's autism, ADHD, dyslexia, a combination, whatever it might be. Their brain type is not going to change if we hide away from the reality of that label. The second reason that we should embrace and lean into this label is that that can help to reduce stigma. If we bury our heads in the sand and pretend that our child isn't different, then we're perpetuating this idea that there is something wrong. So let's lean into that label, let's embrace it in its fullness. And we'll be talking about the fullness of the label and not just the deficits in a moment. But the third reason I think it's really important that we lean into that label is because once we understand our child's neurotype, their brain type, we can make adjustments to remove some of this friction that I mentioned earlier. So that's the first thing, just a little bit of context around the labelling issue. Now, the second issue that contributes to a lack of confidence, I think, in a neurodivergent identity is this outdated language around the diagnostic criteria. And if your child or yourself, if you've been through the assessment process, you'll know that the diagnostic criteria are all incredibly negative. They're all deficit-based. And this increases stigma, and this is why people might be reluctant to attach that label to their child. So words like disorder is probably the worst, because the science has moved on now. We know that it's not necessarily a disorder, it is just a difference. And we need to see this neurotype, their brain type, as neutral information. And what makes life incredibly difficult is that they are in a minority. Most people's brains don't work the way ours do. But that is not to say that it is a deficit or a disorder. As I say, the science has moved on. And ADHD is my favorite example to cite here, because attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is so misleading. We know now from the science that the ADHD brain doesn't have a deficit of attention. It is an attention regulation issue. It's about how dopamine is regulated, and sometimes it's tidal. It's tidal. So sometimes the tide will be out and the dopamine levels, the attention levels are very low and they struggle to focus. But sometimes the tide is in and those dopamine levels, those focus levels are really high. And that's when we get that hyper focus. So the science has moved on, but unfortunately the language hasn't. So I've got a couple of action points here in trying to ensure that we create the right sort of neuro-affirming environment around our children. And the first is to challenge these outdated perceptions, to challenge any misleading or inaccurate language. I hear this in the mainstream media all the time. I hear expressions like, oh, autism and other health conditions, mental health conditions. Autism and other mental health conditions. Neurodivergence is not a mental health condition. I will talk to you a moment about some mental health statistics and why we do need to be very, very mindful of our neurodivergent children's mental health. But neurodivergence in itself is not a mental health condition. But the two issues seem to be conflated a lot, particularly in the press. So we need to be really vigilant as members of the neurodivergent community in challenging that misleading language and inaccurate use of language. And also, let's be brave. I've even heard teachers say, I don't see the point in labelling. It's not going to change anything in the education system. Let's challenge that, because if we understand how our children's brain works, we can remove the stigma and the shame around it, and we can start to cultivate an idea of their strengths and start to look at the other side of the coin and make quite deliberate decisions about the language you're going to use. And this idea of looking at the other side of the coin is really important, because we do, have to accept that life can be really, really challenging as a neurodivergent person. And a lot of the language used around neurodivergence isn't necessarily wrong. I know that the ADHD child will really struggle with focus and attention, and they will be accused of being distracted quite a bit. But if we understand the neuroscience behind why they're distracted, why they struggle with attention, we can look at the other side of that distraction. We can talk about the fact that actually their brain is processing a great deal more information than their neurotypical friends. So they notice everything. They're really perceptive. They're constantly processing. They're curious. These are all other ways of expressing the same issue of being distracted. And just for balance, autistic children are often accused of being overly sensitive. And the other way of looking at being overly sensitive is that they are incredibly emotionally aware, empathetic, intuitive, or highly attuned with people around them. Again, very perceptive, big-hearted. So when we are talking to children about their neurodivergent traits and some of the really intense feelings they have sometimes, and we're going to come on to intense feelings when we look at emotional regulation, we need to make sure that we are helping them see both sides of this coin. For every neurodivergent trait that is perceived in some sort of negative way, and there's just a few examples on the screen there, there is another side of the coin to look at. Okay, so I am going to just finish off this idea of cultivating a confident neurodivergent identity with a quick look at masking and a little look at some mental health statistics. And remember, what we're trying to do here is help them be accepting of their neurodivergent label, understand it so that they can get the best from it, and ensuring that the language we use is accurate and equally as neuroaffirming as it is being realistic about the difficulties. Now, in the main training that I do, I talk quite a lot about masking, but I'm just going to touch on it briefly here in the context of a confident neurodivergent identity, to the extent that the existence of masking or adjusting who you are to try and fit in your environment, just the fact that these children do mask and they feel the need to adjust themselves is evidence that they don't feel comfortable in their own skin, that they don't feel able to be completely themselves. So we might say, oh, well, they're okay. they're coping at school, they're fine. But actually, it's a really elaborate and intense and exhausting coping mechanism where they are constantly scanning the environment, trying to make sure that they're getting everything right. Couple that with a brain that struggles to process information and has to process a lot more sensory information than their neurotypical peers. And you can understand why they hit this sort of cognitive load and hit this capacity level much more quickly because of this masking. So if I have time at the end, because I promised myself I'd keep this to 30 minutes, so I'm going to try and keep each breakthrough to 10 minutes. If we have time at the end, I'm going to tell you a story about an undercover, this idea of being an undercover spy in France and how that links to neurodivergence. So do remind me to tell you that story if you want a kind of concrete example of what masking looks like. But our job in terms of trying to support and cultivate this confident neurodivergent identity is supporting unmasking at home where they feel safe. And very often we see the negative side of unmasking. They've coped at school all day. They've kept it together. They've tried to perform and fit in just the way that is expected of them. And it all falls apart at home and they feel like they can relax, the mask can come away. But unfortunately, that's happening at a time when they have hit capacity. And we see the negative side of that. If we can get used to supporting unmasking at home more, then we won't reach capacity so quickly. So let's celebrate those neurodivergent traits. That will help them unmask. Let's normalize stimming. And this is probably one of my biggest challenges personally. You know, hand flapping is a bit awkward. Constantly chewing clothes would infuriate me because you're always replacing them. But, you know, chewing, hand flapping, all these different ways of self-soothing are their way of regulating their body and trying to keep their nervous system grounded. And if they are doing these very visible stims at home, then let's help them unmask, and that will support with the regulation of their nervous system. And we can try and remove shame from their struggles with intense emotions, try and remove shame from some of the language associated with neurodivergence. So just a couple of points there around trying to support unmasking at home, as much to conserve energy, as much as embracing them for their true neurodivergent selves. Now, I just want to bring this into sharp focus before I move on to the second breakthrough with I'm just going to give one statistic actually on mental health. All of the statistics are fairly similar, but I think the most horrifying for me as an autistic person with an autistic son is the statistic that, and trigger warning here, it might be worth having headphones in if you don't at home, or to hit mute now, but if you're autistic, you are 3 times more likely to take your own life than a neurotypical person. So looking after our children's confidence and sense of self in this world that doesn't really make sense to them, they are constantly trying to make sense of it. These mental health statistics really help us understand how important it is that we do this work as parents or people with neurodivergent people in our lives, so that we understand what they're going through. There's an awareness of the importance of understanding how their brain works and how life can be a real struggle if we don't help them with some of these issues. So that is breakthrough number 1. Let's cultivate a confident neurodivergent identity. Let's celebrate their neurodivergent strengths by looking at some of those language choices. Let's challenge incorrect or misleading language where we hear it. And let's support them in unmasking at home. I can see I'm already running over and I didn't even tell my story. Okay, so breakthrough number 2 is much more practical, so I'll be able to skip through this more quickly. This is about supporting executive function skills. So executive function skills are around this management part of the brain, this prefrontal cortex that allows us to plan, to organize, to sequence, to get started on tasks, to know what to do and when. It's the brain's management system. Now, neurodivergent brains find this more difficult. And generally for ADHDers, that's around dopamine regulation. For autistic people, that tends to be around sensory regulation and the sensory information that they are having to process. And for dyslexics, it tends to be around the pressure that the working memory is under because of the way that the dyslexic brain processes language. But whatever your neurotype, because let's be honest, most people, most neurodivergent people do have co-occurring conditions. Ultimately, the executive function issue is about trying to hold less information in your mind, to take some of the pressure off the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for these executive functions. If we can take some of the pressure off holding things in the brain, then we will access more of those executive function skills more easily. So I've got 5 ways to really help do that. And you will notice that there's quite a crossover with supporting emotional regulation as well, which is part of executive function. So first of all, I can't tell you how important the nervous system is in supporting neurodivergent children. Being able to see if a child is dysregulated, if we're trying to ask a dysregulated child to plan something or to start something or to sequence something, to use those executive function skills, they simply don't have access to those executive function skills if they're dysregulated. So this dysregulated state is where the nervous system is activated and you have one of these, what are commonly referred to as the fight, flight, freeze or fawn response. When you're dysregulated, you're doing one of those things. You're fighting, you're avoiding, you are freezing and shutting down, or increasingly psychologists talk about this fawn response, whereby children will people please to try and feel safe enough, to feel safe and regulate their nervous system that way. If we don't have a regulated nervous system, we cannot access those executive function skills. That part of the brain in the prefrontal cortex goes offline. So the first thing we need to do is try to ensure that we are supporting a regulated nervous system. And I will give more detail on regulation strategies in a moment. The second thing that we need to do, so the nervous system is all internal, but the second thing that we need to do is support reducing sensory stimulus and the sensory load from these children's environments, because the ability for children to process all of this sensory information is much more challenging, particularly for autistic children, but I would say most neurodivergent children. They have to process, their brain is less capable of filtering a lot of this sensory information, lights, noise, smells. It can't process out a lot of this irrelevant information. So you're constantly battling for, the prefrontal cortex is constantly battling through what is relevant and what is not. If we reduce the sensory load that they have to manage, then they're going to have better access to those executive function skills. So if we can see a child who's struggling with sensory overload, it's reducing the lights, it's reducing the noise, it's just reducing all of that sensory input will help open up access to those executive function skills. The third thing that we can do to support executive function is externalizing as much of this information that they are trying to juggle in their prefrontal cortex to the outside somehow. That can be writing it all down and having planning formats and visual aids to help to organize all of their ideas. But if they are trying to organize everything in their head, then they are going to get overwhelmed very quickly. They need to be able to use whiteboards. They need to be able to jot their ideas down. They need to be able to color code, move things around. And there are various ways that they can externalize what they are thinking through in that prefrontal cortex part of the brain. It might be making voice notes. It might be writing on tables. It might be writing on walls. There are lots of different ways, but we need to help build a framework around these children where we encourage them and we give them the tools to externalize their ideas. And that can be really messy to begin with, but once everything is out, they can then reset and then start the second step, which will be organizing that information, for example. But externalization is really, really important. The fourth way to help improve the access to these executive function skills is creating predictability as much as possible, because it's basically giving the child less to worry about. If the environment around them is predictable, they know what's coming next, then they are not having to constantly work out what's coming next, and that's draining of energy. Autistic children in particular struggle with something called predictive processing. This is why if you change plans, it can be a real struggle for them. And as soon as there is this sense of not knowing what's coming next and unpredictability, again, those executive function skills go offline. So let's remove unpredictability from them. Let's have visual timetables. Let's have a year planner on a wall of the house somewhere so that children can see what's coming up. My husband made the terrible mistake one year of buying me a week to view calendar. He's very generous. He buys me a calendar every Christmas, and one year he bought me a week to view. And because I could not see, and the children could not see visually beyond 1 week, that was quite stressful. We need to create a structure around these children where there's as much predictability as possible, because it will help free up those executive function skills. And then finally, probably the most practical is to break every task possible into really visible, achievable steps. And if we're just told to start a task or write this essay, it's too vague and it's too big. This brain that's already processing a great deal more information is going to struggle knowing where to start. So we need to make the starting point really clear and then help them learn that skill of breaking tasks down into really visible, obvious chunks. I have other points that I might come back to, but I'm going to leave executive function there. This is all about freeing up space in the prefrontal cortex so that they can access these planning, organization skills more readily in those 5 ways. And each can be broken down and discussed at length separately. But if you have an awareness that internally, externally, we want to be reducing the load, externalizing thinking, creating predictability, and breaking everything down into chunks, you will be creating an environment around them where just naturally over time, they find that they are able to access those executive function skills more readily. Okay, final breakthrough number 3, which is emotional regulation. As I said at the beginning, this is probably the most visible because it's where we tend to see meltdowns and all of that sort of distressing behavior of managing these difficult and intense feelings. As I've said earlier, neurodivergent brains take on more information at once than neurotypical brains. Neurodivergent brains struggle to filter that information. There is more of it, so I liken it to a sort of email spam filter. Email inboxes that have a really strong spam filter mean that you're only going to get the emails that are relevant to you. It gets rid of all of the irrelevant spam emails. That's much harder for the neurodivergent brain because we are holding so much more and managing so much more information. So the filtering system is different, but also switching attention from one task to another is harder. So all of these things lead to becoming a sense of overwhelm, like cognitive overwhelm. So the brain is getting overloaded more quickly, which means that thinking part of the brain is going offline, and the limbic system, the sort of emotional part of the brain, is taking control. If it perceives a threat, it will go into protection mode, which is where you see these dysregulated responses of fight, flight, freeze and fawn, as I've mentioned. This is not bad behavior. It's a nervous system response when the children are becoming dysregulated in this way. So what can we do to support? I said that I was going to talk you through some regulation strategies. I've got 5 strategies that I'm going to talk through very quickly now for point 1. So do jot these down. But I forgot to mention at the beginning, there is a supplementary workbook that goes with this training. It's a bit more detailed than this training because this is a condensed version, but I'm very happy to send that through to by email to anyone who wants it, just to save you scribbling notes. But my 5 regulation strategies are these. First of all, don't be afraid of using sensory tools. It's like embracing stimming. It might make us feel a bit uncomfortable, like, oh, why do they have to use the fidget, or why do they have to use the stress ball? This is a way of helping them regulate their nervous system so that we don't hit that overwhelm quite so quickly. So sensory tools. Experiment with those. I completely empathize with teachers who don't like anything clicky or noisy, but they don't have to be. Squashy ones. There are lots of silent fidgets. Also, chewing can be a really incredible way of regulating. That masseter muscle is very powerful in helping children regulate, which is why they chew. Second regulation strategy is around releasing this overwhelm more routinely as it builds. So this tends to involve movement, and it's about burning off or releasing this excess energy. So moving around, climbing trees, stretching, these are all ways of releasing tension as it builds up. The third is grounding. So this is much more along the lines of mindfulness and bringing your attention into the moment. And ways that we can do that are mindfulness techniques like the 5-4-3-2-1 method, which is tell me 5 things that you can see right now. Then tell me 4 things that you can reach out and touch. Tell me 3 things that you can hear. Then tell me 2 things that you can smell and 1 thing perhaps that you can taste. And just going through that 5-4-3-2-1 technique, sensory technique, allows you, it brings your brain into the moment. So that's a grounding technique. Other ways are, some people find water, cold water, really grounding. So that could be a splash on the face. It could be drinking cold water. And another one is pressure, that proprioceptive input. This is why weighty blankets are really regulating, really grounding for children. So the third approach to regulation is grounding. Then we have connection, and this is where co-regulation comes in, just a safe presence of someone around you. It might be that if emotions have already escalated, it's just being a safe, silent presence, but they will still feed off your nervous system. They will still sense your calm presence if you stay. This is why sending a child to their room when they're dysregulated can be really damaging. And I know that there is a fine line between the behavior that we're seeing not being acceptable, but actually in that moment and trying to get them regulated, sending them away can be counterproductive. That co-regulation sense of safety, and if it's not so escalated, it can be talking. We as adults need co-regulation as well, just someone to talk to. So we have sensory tools, sense of release, grounding, and also connection, and then finally just slowing down. This is similar to the grounding techniques. Slow breathing, all of those different breathing techniques, in for 4, out for 6. Slowing your breathing is going to soothe the nervous system. So those are my 5 regulation strategies, and those need to be used routinely. We don't want to wheel those out as things are escalating. We can when we know what works at different times in that meltdown cycle. Once you are in full meltdown, you need to let them offload that to get it out. But either side of that, we need to be working out which of these regulation strategies are best for them to avoid them ever reaching that meltdown point. Secondly, this is quite tricky. Name it to tame it. This is a phrase Dr. Dan Siegel coined in his book, and this is about naming feelings to take the power out of them, to tame them. And this is about recognizing and validating all feelings so that we don't sweep uncomfortable feelings under the carpet. We name it, we say it for what it is. I see that you are feeling angry, or I see that you are feeling frustrated. If we name it, we take some of the power out of it. We're validating it. That's not to say it's okay if it's presenting itself in an aggressive or unkind way, but validating the feeling removes the shame. Shame is, you will find yourself in a sort of self-perpetuating cycle of shame if you just suppress these awkward or unwanted feelings. So just telling them to get on with it, or pull yourself together, or stop being silly, or stop being like that, is really invalidating. What we want to do is give them the space to recognize those feelings, and that in itself isn't always easy for neurotypical children. Anyone who's alexithymic or struggles to feel the physical sensations of dysregulation coming on because of proprioception, that's how you recognize feelings, interoception, sorry, inside your body. If you struggle to recognize these feelings coming up, it can be quite difficult, which is why we need to be quite explicit in teaching them. Okay, let's talk about how that feeling feels. Let's name it. Let's turn it inside out, completely offload it, process it, and then learn from it. And in a totally separate training, I talk about the accept, explain, reframe technique, whereby we accept feelings and give them space to offload them. We explain those feelings and give context to them, and then we reframe them more positively and learn from them. The point is, we've got to stop just sweeping uncomfortable emotions under the carpet. We need to get them out, process them, so that eventually they will be able to tolerate them better, and we won't end up in a situation of overwhelm and meltdown. Thirdly, we need to reduce the amount of input that these children are managing. This is all about externalization again, and taking pressure off the prefrontal cortex, so that it doesn't tip into relying on the emotional part of the brain, which is protective. Again, creating predictable, safe rhythms in life so that there is less cognitive load. they know what's coming next. That is not going to trigger them into feeling overwhelmed, the more predictable that their life is. And then finally, it's about making regulation a kind of routine part of their life. I will probably do somatic work. So somatic work is sort of stretching and basically retraining my nervous system. I think I will probably do somatic work first thing in the morning for the rest of my life, because I know that as a neurodivergent person, my nervous system needs a lot more support than a neurotypical person. So I have to do that routinely, even when I'm feeling calm, so that I can train my nervous system into feeling safe more of the time and more routinely. So those are my sort of 5 takeaways, 5 things that you really need to understand to make a breakthrough with emotional regulation. Now, every single bullet point or number that I've worked through here is a training within itself. Today's half hour or so, 40 minutes, today's session has been more about raising awareness of the most important things that matter, the things that you really need to focus on and understand if you want to make inroads into having a confident neurodivergent identity, to protect their self-esteem, to protect their mental health. If you want to give them better access to these executive functioning skills, and if you want to help calm this emotional regulation, if you want to get better at emotional regulation, those are the things that I've covered tonight are the things that you need to give most of your attention to, rather than quick hacks and quick ways of changing behavior to make life feel easier in the short term. We need to go a bit deeper in exploring each of those points that we've covered and how they will support unlocking this confidence, executive function, and better emotional regulation. I'm going to leave you with 3 things here. If you still feel like you're stuck, you might have followed along everything I've said and nodded and thought, okay, but I'm still not sure what I'm going to do day to day. I'm going to send you a recording of this training so you can rewatch it, because I know I've spoken quickly because I made a promise of keeping it to 30 minutes. But if you're feeling stuck, what I would say is that you need to have this ongoing understanding of how your child's brain works differently and needs different support, rather than trying to sort of make them fit in and perform in the way that everybody else does. So understanding how the ADHD brain is different, understanding executive function. Again, I've got a whole training on that alone. And then the second thing is, even once, because many of you, I'm sure, will have got to that point, you understand that your child is different, they've got different needs, and you've got a fairly good handle perhaps on what those needs are now, even if it's hard to put them into practice sometimes, you know what you're aiming for. But I'm seeing this with my children, you know, their needs change as they grow. Hormones will kick in at some point. The expectations around them will change, whether that's to do with peer relationships or exams in school. It's changing all the time, so we need to be keeping on our toes. But I've got a couple of things to help with that. Now, I promised prizes, and I'm just going to look at my other screen now so that I'm ready to see thumbs up in a moment, because I've got some prizes. I'm going to send out a signed copy of my newly released book, which I know some of you have already got, but I will be giving one of those away, sending that in the post to you signed, and I'm going to be picking that person in a moment. So if you are interested in a prize, I feel a bit cringy here, but I wanted to give something away for you giving me your time. So if you are interested in a prize, I'm going to pick someone at random at the end. And the first one is a copy of my book. And then the second prize that I've got is actually a lifetime membership to my new NDC collective, which is a sort of a monthly subscription, a platform, a space where parents work with me on an ongoing basis for practical day-to-day support. where parents want to move sort of beyond just general understanding of neurodivergence and how it applies in day-to-day life. And the reason that this membership has come about is because I've been working with a wonderful group of parents over the last 6 weeks on my Neurodivergent Compass 6-week program, where we've done a deep dive on all of these issues. We've done a full 6-week program together, and we want to carry on working together. So I'm setting up a monthly membership so that we can tackle all of the topics we've looked at in more detail. So, for example, it might include diet. We've got a dietitian coming in to speak to the group, an ADHD nutritionist coming to speak to the group. We've got a counsellor who specialises in neurodivergence. We've got an expert guest speaker on rejection sensitivity dysphoria. So I'm setting up this group so that we can be continually building on our understanding, sharing our understanding with each other, supporting regulation, executive function, creating routines and environments around these children together, sharing our knowledge. I'm bringing in expert guests. I will do some talks myself. I'll be putting together little cheat sheets on the topic that we cover each week so that you can use these cheat sheets yourself, but also share them with family members who might not understand what rejection sensitivity is. And we're going to gradually build a library of resources, and we'll have a weekly talk. It's going to be a really private, supportive, members-only group. And I've already scheduled, as you can see, the first 3 months, and going to be giving away one of those membership spots. So all of the parents that have done the 6-week program with me are already in and have given me lots of ideas on the sorts of things that they want to be covered. So you can see in that schedule, provisional schedule at the moment, where I've got expert guests coming in sometimes I'll be doing the talks, and how we tackle a different topic every week. There'll be lots of discussion around them. There'll be extra drop-in Q&A sessions, so that we can all support each other at whichever stage our child is at. So I'm going to be giving that away to somebody. I've just shared some testimonial information there that people have given to me, either working through my short courses in a half term, the long 6-week program, and other ways that I've supported parents with their neurodivergent children, just to give you an idea of how some of the parents I've worked with have found working with me. So if that membership sounds interesting to you, we're calling it the NDC Collective. So that's the Neurodivergent Compass. And then the collective is the monthly membership. And I'm going to be giving that away to somebody now. Now, obviously, the lovely people who are already in the membership, who have joined, I'm just going to stop sharing here now, who have joined the membership already, there is no point in giving it to you, but I am just going to try and make sure I'm back to my screen. I can't see anyone's face, which is really disconcerting. But I am going to give this, I'm going to give a copy of the book that I have just republished. It's the 2nd edition. Okay, Karen, you are right in the middle of my screen. So Karen, I'm going to post that book to you. I'm going to email you to ask for your postal address, and I'm going to send you a signed copy of my book, and I'm going to give Romina a spot on the membership. And I really wanted to announce the prizes live because I did say to people, if you show me the commitment of turning up live, then I think that it's fair that I announce those prizes there and then. So congratulations to Karen and to Romina. I hope that that's going to be useful. I will send you, Romina, the information about the NDC Collective and that long schedule of talks and opportunities that we've got coming up. Everything in the membership, by the way, will be recorded and stored in the private members only portal, because I want the conversations with me and the guest expert to be really free and open and ask questions. So we're going to store those in a private portal so that people's confidentiality is maintained, but you can always watch those videos back if the timing of the sessions from one week to another doesn't work for you, which I know it's really difficult. The other point I was going to make is that those sessions within the membership will change from one week to the next. So you've seen the beginnings of my schedule there, but we'll give plenty of notice of the timings. Mine will tend to be on a Thursday or a Monday afternoon and a Thursday evening. But my other guest speakers might have to do their talks at different times. So we will see how that goes. So I hope that's useful to Romina. You'll be joining the other parents who are already with me. Now, the membership isn't going to open until the 30th of April, because I'm going to do a little bit of work promoting that between now and then. So welcome, Romina. I'm glad that you're going to be joining us. Now, I'm very happy to spend some time online now. I know that your time is precious, and I promised 30 minutes, and it's been more like 45 or 50 minutes. But I'm very happy to stay online and answer any questions at all about that whistle-stop tour of those three big issues: confidence, executive function, and emotional regulation. It's an awful lot of information to take in one go. I normally do that over an hour, but I'm very happy to answer any questions if anyone has any. Otherwise, you can email me, and I'll be very happy to answer questions in any way that suits. I know that sometimes if you have children around at the moment, it's not the easiest. Oh, I'm just reading messages now. Thank you. Nice to see you, Joanne. Don't worry about being late. I've not seen you since February. It's lovely to see you again. Romina, I'm really glad that you're excited about joining the NDC Collective. Pisa, thank you for coming all the way from, joining us all the way from South Africa. Okay, if we haven't got any questions, I don't want you to feel like you have to stay online with me, but I'm very happy just to hang out and answer any questions if anyone does have any.